Hey y'all, welcome back to most of it. The Siege of Terra was a rough time for pretty much everyone involved. The Loyalists were in a race to stay alive just long enough for the Ultramarines to arrive, all while their strongest weapon, the Emperor, was strapped to a chair as he fought off the forces of the warp, becoming more and more exhausted by the second. The traitors were definitely in a better position, but not by much. They of course had more troops and weapons, but they were in a race against the clock for when Gilman arrived, and absolutely plastered them. 6 traitor Primarchs and their legions against 4 kinda Primarchs and their legions. When you really look at it, it's super impressive that the Loyalists were able to hold out as long as they did. But all this raises a question for me. There was one other Primarch and Legion that had the option to be at the siege and instead chose a different path. One that turned from the established plan most of his brothers followed and struck out on one of the most dangerous and ballsy endeavors in the galaxy's history. That man was Leman Russ and his Space Wolves. Russ and his legion were on Terra before the siege, but they left to go and try kill Horus, so of course all that makes me ask, should the Space Wolves have stayed on Terra? Well, that's what I'll be going over today. Using lore and a healthy dose of speculation and theorizing, I'll determine the, in my opinion, most likely outcome to determine whether the Space Wolves should have stayed on Terra for the siege, or whether they made the right call. So without further ado, let's get into this. Also, quick side note, sorry if my voice is weird, I've got the flu right now, but anyway, on to the video. So first, I think I should establish why Russ felt like he should go kill Horus the way he did in canon, and how he did it. After being tricked into destroying Prospero and killing Magnus, Russ kinda became disillusioned with his status as the Emperor's executioner. He realized just how easily he was duped into killing one of his brothers, and while he didn't necessarily regret it, with him saying that Magnus deserved what he got for breaking the Emperor's edict alone, he did definitely start to see that he wasn't really his own master. All of this made him start to question the path that he had been placed on, and he began being more independent in both speech and action, with Malcador even kind of telling him to check himself before he wrecked himself on one occasion. So when Sanguinius arrived on Terra and a council was called, Russ would decide that he had to switch things up and start doing his own thing. Russ would inform his brothers that he would be departing soon to go kill Horus. He saw it as cowardly to wait for the traitors to arrive in Terra and instead decided to go take the fight to them. Jagatai Khan and Sanguinius kind of agreed with him, seeing that taking the initiative away from the traitors was a smart move, but Rogal was strongly against it, but when has Russ ever been known to listen to anybody? Also, quick side note, why was Dorn surprised by this? I mean, the way each Primarch handled the heresy shows what they were made for. Dorn fortified, Gilman organized, Corax began guerrillaing, so of course Russ would charge in to cut the head off the snake. It's who he is, but anyway. So Russ would return to Fenris with his legion, where he would undergo a ritual where he would traverse the Underverse and kind of speak with the world spirit of Fenris. Here he would undergo trials, which are pretty much one-for-one trials that like Thor or Odin did in Norse mythology, which is freaking sick. But after all the trials, he would end up finding out that the spear the Emperor had given him bore a piece of the Emperor's power, which could reveal something to anyone it pierced. So what would Russ do with this information? Yep, he stabbed himself with it. This would reveal the truth of the Primarchs to him and also how he could kill Horus. So after all that, he and his legion would assault the Vengeful Spirit, using a path laid out by the Knight Errants, and a battle ensued where a lot of Space Wolves were killed. But Russ was able to stab Horus with his spear, which caused the corruption to disappear from him temporarily. But Russ would end up getting stabbed back by Horus and would have to be evacuated by his sons and eventually fell into a coma. The wolves would be forced to run from the traitors, and eventually they met up with the Raven Guard, and Russ was taken to Deliverance to heal. Soon after that, the Lion would meet them there and recruited the wolves and some of the Raven Guard to help him in his campaign going around blowing up traitor homeworlds. So while they were still doing stuff, the Space Wolves were pretty much taking out of the rest of the heresy, making their attack on Horus pretty costly. Okay, so that's how it went in canon. So let's say the wolves never left Terra. What would have changed? Well, the Sol system would definitely be more secure for one. With another Primarch and Legion at his disposal, Rogal would have been able to fortify more, and they would have had more troops to like form blockades and the like. And when the traitors did arrive, they would have had a harder time than in canon. Even depleted from Prospero and the Alpha Legion blockades, the Space Wolves were still one of the most effective legions, especially against Chaos, which the traitors made great use of. And Leman Russ was one of the greatest Primarch duelists, so to have them on the field during the siege could potentially have been a game changer. Like, imagine Russ pulling up to Mortarion alongside the Khan, or fighting Fulgrim next to Dorn. But here's where we run into our first issue. With Russ not attacking Horus, the traitors are able to muster their forces quicker and more effectively, and push for Terra potentially months earlier than in canon. This means that they pull up with the same forces, but early enough that the Ultramarines' arrival isn't a pressing threat for them. This is a massive game changer, as the whole reason the Siege of Terra went the way it did was the Ultramarines were on their way and Horus didn't have the time to finish the siege the way he wanted. That's what made Horus drop his Void Shields and invite the Emperor aboard to duel. Now, whether the Space Wolves and Russ would have been enough to turn the tide of the siege altogether, I personally gotta say no. The Ultramarines were the only legion still large enough to drastically affect the outcome of the siege, so I ultimately think the Wolves would have just bought a little more time and potentially killed Fulgrim or something rather than him getting bored and leaving, stuff like that. But that extra time could potentially have made it so the Ultramarines could make it, so maybe they should have stayed. So some of you may be thinking that the Wolves staying could have been a good call, right? But so far I've purposefully overlooked the most important piece of all this. Russ's attack in canon put Horus in a coma. This not only bought the Loyalists more time, but it also made Lorgar start to see Horus as a weak champion of Chaos, and he tried to supplant him using Fulgrim as a weapon. This of course didn't work, and Lorgar got wrecked and banished by Horus, with most of his legion leaving with him. This right here was the most impactful thing Russ accomplished with his attack. The Wordbearers are one of the largest legions during the Heresy, being behind or alongside, I believe, the Iron Warriors and Sons of Horus, so to have them on Terra during the siege would have been game over for the Loyalists, even if the Ultramarines made it on time. Also, the Wordbearers and Lorgar specifically made the largest use of demons among the traders, so you could also double the amount of demons present during the siege, and yeah, Terra would have been cooked. It's funny, because the Wordbearers and Lorgar especially are often referred to by fans as weak choir boys, but during the Heresy, everything they touched went their way and was absolutely devastating for the Loyalists. I mean, look at what they did to Calth. If the Wordbearers were present during the Siege of Terra, there's no doubt in my mind that the Imperium would no longer be standing today. So to sum up, if the Wolves had stayed on Terra, Terra definitely would have been destroyed, and Horus would have won. The Dark Angels, Ultramarines, Raven Guard, Iron Hands, and Salamanders would be the only remaining legions, with the Hands and Salamanders Primarchs being dead. The 5 of them would somehow have to run away while managing to pull off some hit-and-run attacks here and there, all while Chaos laughed in the background as humanity was slowly ground away against the War Master's ambitions. They probably could have managed to survive for a little bit, but eventually they would have gotten caught and killed, with all of humanity eventually being under the rule of Horus and his cabal of traitors, which is just not good for anybody. Also, all this would have meant that Eldrad Ulthran's cabal would have gotten their way, letting Horus win and humanity being destroyed, and as a professional knife-eared hater, I'll be damned if the Eldar ever get their way. So to officially answer the question, should the Space Wolves have stayed on Terra? Absolutely not. Russ definitely made the right call attacking Horus, and while it didn't go as smooth as it could have, it was ultimately still the most effective play that could have been made given the circumstances. It's interesting how one move that often gets overlooked by fans as one of Russ's dumber moments changed the course of the whole siege in such a way that the Loyalists secured victory, or at least survived. But is there anything I would have changed about how Russ attacked Horus? Well, if he didn't hesitate and actually killed him, of course, that would have been better. But personally, if I was Russ, I would have tried to take Jagatai Khan with me. The Khan was absolutely instrumental during the siege, but if he and Russ pulled up against Horus, I don't really think the War Master would have stood much of a chance. Also, Jagatai had a pretty large grudge against Horus, as they were pretty close before the Heresy, so if Russ had asked him, I bet he would have said yes. And I'm not saying take the White Scars with him, just the Khan I think would have been enough. That would have broken the traitors' forces at least for a little bit, and would have meant that more Space Wolves would have survived and give the Loyalists even more time to prepare. I also would have tried to take Sanguinius with me, but since he was fated to die at the hands of Horus, maybe that wouldn't have been the right call. But a man can dream, you know. I like Primarch battles. But with all that said, thanks for watching, y'all. And what do you think? Should the Space Wolves have stayed on Terra in your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. Also, sorry for the shorter upload this week. As I said, I got the flu, so I didn't have much energy to do a lot. And sorry if my voice was distracting throughout all this. But anyway, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know what videos you'd like to see from me in the future. Be sure to check out my community tab where I run polls and post memes from time to time. And with all that said, you have a great day, and I'll see y'all later.